let's discuss the bizarre disappearance of Dale Staling. Dale is a 51-year-old man who went missing under suspicious circumstances in Mesa Verde National Park. Mesa Verde isn't just an evil financial institution, it's a gorgeous national park in Colorado. On July 9th, 2013, Dale, his wife, and his parents all went to the national park. They all planned to stay in their car and kind of drive around and sightsee because it was a hot day. The peak was 100 degrees. So the family pulls up to the gift shop and it's next to a ranger station, and Dale wants to get out and walk to the Spruce Treehouse. The Spruce Treehouse is remnants of housing built by the native Pueblo people between 1211 and 1278 CE. It was literally only a quarter of a mile away from the gift store and followed a direct trail. No one really wanted to go, so around 4:15, Dale took off by himself to go see the treehouse, expected to turn right around. He didn't really carry anything except for his wallet. Dale never returned, and his family grew really concerned given that it should have taken 10 minutes to walk there. A formal search began around 7 o'clock that night. A formal 2-week search for Dale was unsuccessful, even though there were over 60 people looking for him and a team of search dogs. It was discovered that other people had seen Dale hiking on the nearby Petroglyph Trail. That trail is 2.4 miles long and is very rugged, you would need hiking equipment or at least good shoes and water. It follows the canyon wall and leads up to Spruce Treehouse. Dale was spotted about 1.5 miles away from the trailhead, so he was still on that path. Another family had even unintentionally taken a photo of Dale, and he looked relaxed and normal. At some point during the search, a hiker did report hearing faint calls for help, but nothing came of that. The path is really well marked. He would have had to intentionally leave the path to go missing. And it's still a mystery why Dale chose to take that trail versus just walking straight to the Spruce Treehouse, which was only a 4th mile. Absolutely no physical evidence was found, and it remained that way for the next 7 years. On September 17th of 2020, an anonymous tip led to Dale's body. Dale's body was found 4.2 miles away from the trailhead, which is bizarre because even if he took Petroglyph Trail to the treehouse instead of the short way, he wouldn't have been that far away. There were only skeletal remains left, so nothing could be fully determined other than that there were no traumatic injuries. Investigators suspect no foul play at all, but despite this, they refuse to give out the exact location that Dale's body was found. But there could be many reasons for this. His family loves him, misses him, and still wants answers. His case was featured on Missing 411, which is a really interesting documentary, basically theorizing that aliens are the reason for all these missing disappearances, or Bigfoot, or they don't know, something. I use no AI in my videos. Let me know what you think.
She told her friend she was walking in the forest naked on a spiritual adventure, and they never heard from her again after that day. In 2013, 19-year-old Maureen Kelly behind me went to Gifford Pinchot National Forest in Washington. Her and her friends were camping there. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. Honestly, it was probably a really fun trip for her. She randomly told her friends, "I'm going on a spiritual journey." That's when she stripped all of her clothes off, took a fanny pack with her, and disappeared into the woods. And now this may seem odd, but her friends actually encouraged that. They didn't think anything of it. She even took her shoes off. She just walked barefoot in the forest. She had a knife, a bunch of matches, and a compass in the fanny pack. She didn't even take her phone, and honestly, she probably needed it, which is sad. Now, like I said, she was never heard from or seen again. Rescuers and searchers came out looking for her. They found barefoot footprints that led up to Canyon Creek Trail. But another strange thing happened. The footprints just randomly disappeared at one point on the trail. No trace of her or anything, no footprints anywhere else. It just disappeared like she vanished into thin air. Obviously, when she didn't return, her friends reported her missing, and that's what led to the search. This may have been normal in their friend group, but I am sure they regret to this day letting her go on that spiritual journey. This case is still open today. It remains a mystery. Nobody knows what happened to her. There's no foul play or struggles involved, as the evidence suggests. Many people claim that the friends did it, but there's no evidence to support that. Maybe if there's a ditch area or like a huge fall off nearby, she just fell into that randomly and that's why the footprint stopped, but I don't know. The reports I was reading, it didn't seem like there was any huge ditches nearby. What do you guys think happened to Maureen? Let me know.
Around 4 p.m. on June 2nd, 2015, 22-year-old river guide Morgan Heimer stood right near the Grand Canyon talking with the lead rafting guide of his group. The rest of the team was busy walking their boats back to the banks of the Colorado River, chatting and just laughing over the sound of rushing water in the background. Morgan and the lead guide were discussing how Morgan needed to take some time off that afternoon just to stretch his legs and clear his head. Well, at that moment, a client from the rafting group suddenly called over to the lead guide asking for help with something. The guide excused himself, telling Morgan that he'd be right back, and walked over to assist the client. The interruption couldn't have lasted more than a minute, but when the guide turned back around to resume his conversation with Morgan, Morgan was just gone. I mean, he literally vanished. The spot where he had been standing just moments before was completely empty. Now, knowing where this story is headed, this might sound alarming, but the guy didn't think much of it at first. I mean, after all, Morgan had just mentioned how he wanted to take a break, so he just figured Morgan had decided to take it early.
But if you want to have a supernatural experience, go to Mount Shasta. Now, something unexplainable is happening there. There have been countless reports from people of these portals that lead to other dimensions, UFO sightings, Bigfoot encounters, ghost activity. There is said to be some sort of underground city that is underneath Mount Shasta. There are these secret tunnels that people claim to lead to other dimensions. And so much strange stuff happens in this specific area. Even in the 1800s, there was this prospector who claimed to have found this underground mine where there were strange skeletons and these ancient artifacts that didn't seem human. Now, there was this girl named Jessie. Jessie said that her father went on this camping trip to Mount Shasta, and when he returned, he was a different person. She said he became very reserved, and he was angry all the time. He would draw these strange numeric codes, and he would draw strange formations on all these papers that he had around the house. And he would leave for periods of time and go to Mount Shasta. Well, she said eventually it led to her parents getting a divorce, and her dad actually bought property near the mountain and built this cabin. Well, she didn't see her father for a very long time, and then one Christmas, she got to stay with him. She said the first couple nights staying with him in this cabin, she noticed that at 10 o'clock at night, he would go out the door, he would go into the woods, and he would be gone till the morning. So she decided one night to follow him, and he leads her out to this cave. She sees her father go to the entrance of this cave, and out steps these two men. She said they looked human, but they were large. They were probably 7-8 feet tall. They had very long hair. And they were wearing some sort of aluminum foil-looking type of outfit. She said they talked with her father for about 5 minutes, and they all went into the cave. And her father disappeared after that. She couldn't find him. So the next day, he returns to the cabin, and he starts yelling at her, saying, I know that you followed me out into the woods. Like, don't ever do that again. You need to stay inside the cabin at night. And she said a couple nights later, she was asleep. And she woke up to the sound of her father talking to someone in the other room. So she gets up and she sneaks into the hallway. And she said from around the corner, she could see her father talking to these two men that she'd seen out at the caves. And she said they had this long blonde hair, blue eyes. They had some sort of weird tinfoil, aluminum foil looking suit. And she said something seemed off about them. And her father, when he would talk to them, they wouldn't talk back. But yet it seemed like they could communicate without speaking. And all of a sudden, she hears, inside her mind, something say, we know you're watching. Don't be afraid. And that scared her, so she ran back to her bedroom. And she said, the next day she confronted her father. Who were those men in her cabin? Like, who were those people? And she said her father told her it was no one, like, you probably were just dreaming it, like it didn't happen. But she knows that she'd seen these two men. And she said still to this day, her father lives out there near Mount Shasta. And he draws these strange pictures and these, numeric codes. And she said it's very much changed her father's whole life.
Have y'all heard about the feral people that live in the woods of the Appalachian Mountains? Legend has it that there are groups of feral humans living deep in the mountains of Appalachia, and apparently they are cannibals. One of the most known possible instances of the wild men is the devastatingly sad story of 6-year-old Dennis Martin. Dennis Martin was just a few days shy of his 7th birthday when he went on a camping trip for Father's Day weekend in the summer of 1969. Dennis, his 9-year-old brother, their father, and their grandfather all went on a multi-day hike from Cades Cove to the Appalachian Trail. After spending the night at the Russell Field shelter, they hiked Saturday to the grassy area of Spence Field, which is on the Tennessee and North Carolina line. And this is a picture of Spence Ridge where they would have set up camp. While here, the Martin family had ran into an unrelated Martin family from Alabama, who also had 2 young boys with them. All the parents sat together while they watched the children play. At around 4:30 p.m., the boys were huddled up planning a prank to sneak around behind the adults and jump out and scare them. The parents could tell what the children were up to, but they just played along. The boys' plan was to split up and jump out of both sides of the woods to scare the parents. Dennis was wearing a bright red shirt that was easy to see, so the older 3 boys sent him in the opposite direction by himself. The older boys jumped out, booed the family, and everyone had fun, but when it was time for Dennis to jump out, he didn't. Now, it had only been a few minutes since his dad had saw Dennis sneaking away, but he didn't waste any time before calling out for his son. His dad walked back and forth several miles in every direction, going down nearby trails, and he never found Dennis. Dennis's grandfather hiked the 6 miles from Spence Field all the way back to Cades Cove to report to rangers. He notified the rangers at 8:30 p.m. on Saturday and then hiked several miles back to Spence Field and looked for Dennis the entire way, never finding anything. As darkness started to fall on Saturday, so did about 2.5 inches of rain. The family and rangers searched as much as they could through the night, and they asked everybody they seen and passed on the trail if they had seen or heard anything about Dennis, and nobody had. Dennis was nowhere to be found. On Sunday, a heavy search for Dennis Martin began at 5 a.m. 400 volunteers helped search for Dennis, covering 60 square miles. To this day, it's still the largest search operation in the Great Smoky Mountains National Forest history. Unfortunately, he was never found. There were heavy rains that washed away any traces that might have been left. They did find 1 set of footprints, though. 1 foot had an Oxford shoe, which is the shoe that Dennis was wearing when he went missing, and the other was barefoot, but the parents were convinced that the footprints were too large to be Dennis's. A month later, a man came forward and said that he had been in Cades Cove and he was trying to photograph a bear, and he claimed he heard a piercing scream which sounded like a child. When he went to see what the sound was, all he saw was an old feral-looking man who darted off into the woods. Where he was standing, he found a piece of paper that had a hand-drawn map on it, which makes many people theorize that Dennis's disappearance was at the hands of this group of wild men. The feral, allegedly cannibalistic people who were rumored to live in the Appalachian Mountains. But this report was a month after his disappearance. Dennis was sadly never found, and it's unlikely that we will ever know what actually happened to him.
What is the most paranormal missing persons case you've ever come across? Mine is the case of Carl Landers. Now, before I start this, I must preface that the area that Carl Landers went missing in is a very mystical place. That mountain is called Mount Shasta, a mountain that has many legends and lore. On May 21st, 1999, 69-year-old Carl Herbert Landers from Orlando, California decided to climb to the top of Mount Shasta. He was joined by 2 of his good friends, Milton, who was 64, and Barry, who was 60. All 3 of them were part of the Orlando Roadrunners, a local running club. Now, despite their ages, these men were known to be really active and very, very fit. On Friday, May 21st, 1999 at 3 p.m., they set off on Mount Shasta's bunny trailhead to summit Mount Shasta. They spent a night on the site called 5050. Now, the day they set off, Carl actually had altitude sickness, so he took some Diamox, which is something that's supposed to help ease any sickness from high elevations. Now, one of the known side effects of that medication is diarrhea, which Carl indeed had. Suffice to say that Carl was not feeling 100% during his trip, but he decided to just sleep it off. The next day came and Carl decided to continue on with the trek. However, he told Milt and Barry that he was going to go on ahead since he didn't want to slow them down. So they're like, okay, go ahead, Carl. And that was their point of separation. Now, even with Carl starting ahead of them, you need to understand that Carl was actually wearing a bright pink jacket that his wife had gave him to wear for the trek. so you could easily spot Carl. And where they were hiking is a broad open area with no trees, no holes, no crevices, so it would be impossible for them to lose sight of Carl because there's no way he could outrun their eye of sight. If they even gave him an hour ahead of them to go ahead and start, he would still be in full view. However, at one point, Milt and Barry took their eyes off of him for just like a second, and Carl just vanished. To this day, Carl Landers still missing. No clue, no trace, no body. There are no holes, caves, or crevices to fall into or hide within. So even if he had fallen, his body should have been easily found, especially with the bright pink coat he had on that his wife made him wear. And if it were foul play, then that would mean someone would have needed to carry his body back down the mountain, something no one, including rangers, witnessed. That or bury Carl, but there were no signs of disturbed snow or dirt. The area is broad and open with no trees, located less than 900 feet from the campsite, clearly visible from where they were. There's no reason he should have vanished. Milt Gaines mentioned that he told Carl to go ahead to a small bare spot called Lake Helen, which only was 900 feet from their camp. Carl was fully visible as the other two packed up their gear. It's important to tell you again that at no time could anyone run so fast as to be out of sight from those two hikers. To me, this is absolutely paranormal. What are your thoughts?
This one area around Mount Shasta, the person had disappeared. And I know exactly where they went. So I went and investigated it. I went to that area. And as I was walking into it, it was so creepy. It had that vibe of the forest closing in. There was like a table set up with full birthday party regalia all over it. It was like a picnic table. There was a birthday cake and party hats, but nobody was there.
Dude, that's almost as weird as the random staircase you found in the middle of the forest.
Nobody was there. And then in the next campsite right next to that was just a lone massive axe leaning against the table. It was so creepy.
On.
So y'all are just not going to talk about the little kid who disappeared within like 50 miles of Skinwalker Ranch? Well, I'll be happy to take the reins on that one because you know how I feel about unsolved mysteries. 12-year-old Garrett Bardsley disappeared in the Uinta Mountains August 20th, 2004. Garrett and his father Kevin woke up around 8 a.m. on a Boy Scout camping trip. There were a total of 18 scouts and 6 or 7 adults along on the trip. They headed to a lake for some fishing, and Garrett managed to soak his shoes, socks, and pants. Understandably, Garrett didn't want to wear wet clothes, so he told his father he was going to go back to camp to change. The rest of the Boy Scouts were up a hill only 150 to 250 feet away. Kevin knew Garrett knew where he was, so he allowed his son to walk alone, but kept an eye on him as he went around the lake, even shouting directions of which path Garrett should take. After 20 minutes, Kevin was wondering what was taking his son so long, so he went back to the camp and asked other boys if they had seen Garrett, and nobody had. A huge search of the area with hundreds of official and unofficial searchers started, but they only found a Nike sock belonging to Garrett. The sock was damp and crumpled up like Garrett had taken it off like he was going to get changed, which was in line with what his father said. The campsite was less than a quarter mile away from the lake on a well-established path. Garrett did not have a backpack or any other provisions when he went missing, but he was carrying a short ice fishing pole, which was never located. Hundreds and hundreds of searchers looked for Garrett, even on horseback and using dogs, but no other trace of him could be found. Garrett's sock was half a mile away from where he disappeared in a granite boulder field. Authorities working this case believe that Garrett went into the boulder field trying to find shelter from the cold weather. Because of the mountainous terrain, the temperature dropped to around 18 degrees the night Garrett vanished. Police and Garrett's family do not believe that an abduction took place because there was no evidence of such. And at one point they said they don't believe Garrett made it past the first 48 hours that he was out in the wilderness. The official search for Garrett was called off after 9 days, but family and other volunteers continued to look for him. A 3-mile radius into the mountains was searched from the last place Garrett was seen, but no other evidence was ever found. What is strange about this case is authorities and Garrett's family pretty much wrote off a mountain lion attack and a bear attack. They said there was absolutely no evidence, no trace of blood, no clothing, nothing of Garrett's to be found. Yet they also said an abduction was unlikely. And Garrett was not the only person to disappear in this area over the years. What do you think happened to him?
Aaron Hedges went missing on September 5th, 2014 while elk hunting in the Crazy Mountains in Montana. This was an area he knew like the back of his hand and spent every other weekend up there, in the words of his friends. 2 days after going missing, a huge snowstorm moved into the mountains. Rescue workers stumbled across his shoes and camelback water container. For someone to take off their shoes while there's 18 inches of snow on the ground seems to be a decision someone would make under severe hypothermia. But the strange thing is that 9 months later his backpack was found 6 miles down the mountain next to a place where someone clearly sat and had a thermos of tea. To add to the mystery, from this location he could clearly see people's houses and a road, but never went to them. 1 year later, his remains were found not far from that location. The only explanation for such strange disappearances seems to be linked to something we don't understand. After researching UFOs and aliens for years, I've come to the conclusion they are a spiritual phenomenon, and that is leading me to research a potential dark spiritual phenomenon causing people to disappear. Let me know what you think. I know it sounds crazy. Leave in the comments what you think is happening in these strange disappearances.
A 3-year-old boy vanished while camping with his family near Mount Shasta. For 5 hours, search teams combed the woods looking for him, and then suddenly they found him alive and unharmed on a trail that had already been searched multiple times. Now that should have been the end of the story, but weeks later, the boy told his grandmother what happened. He said a woman who looked exactly like her came out of the woods and took him by the hand. He followed her because he thought she was family. The woman led him into a cave inside Mount Shasta. Now, according to the boy, the cave was filled with spiders, purses, guns, and strange figures who were standing motionless against the walls. Then the woman's face changed. He said she looked like a robot pretending to be his grandmother. The entity examined him and eventually told him that he was the wrong one before leading him back out and leaving him on the trail where the rescuers would find him. And as bizarre as that sounds, Mount Shasta has been attracting stories like this for generations. People claim that the mountain hides lost civilizations, underground cities, UFOs, strange disappearances, and encounters with things that wear human faces. Now, maybe it was the imagination of a 3-year-old, or maybe there's a reason so many strange stories seem to orbit that mountain. So let me ask you, what would be more terrifying? Getting lost in the woods or finding something that already knows exactly who you are?
I don't usually come across a story that genuinely scares me, but this one does, because it involves a woman who disappears in the remote wilderness, and she is presumed dead. But over the next year, multiple people have claimed to see her, or possibly her ghost, in the area where she went missing, and each time they see her, she looks distorted and in a worse condition. This is the mysterious disappearance of Sandra Hughes, and I promise you it will freak you out, so let's talk about it. Sandra Hughes was a 54-year-old woman who loved the outdoors, so when the pandemic first started, she took the opportunity to solo travel and spend a lot of time in the wilderness by herself. Sandra last spoke with her family on June 26, 2020, and this is when she told them that she was going to camp alone in the Sierra National Forest. She was really excited as she had spent the last 6 months in California, often camping alone and gaining a lot of experience in the outdoors. She was actually known to be an outdoor expert and a survivalist, so when she told her family about her upcoming solo camping trip in the Sierra National Forest, they weren't too worried. So off Sandra went, but it wasn't long into the trip that things started to go wrong, and no one could have expected what was about to happen to her or other campers in the area for years to come. On July 1st, 2020, a couple of campers were hiking near Johnson Meadows just above Bass Lake in the Sierra National Forest when they stumbled across an abandoned campsite. It was a really eerie scene because it looked like the campsite had been completely destroyed, and a bunch of things were kind of just strewn around. The campers then found a folder that contained some important documents, like a birth certificate and a social security card. With the campsite being destroyed like this, the campers felt like something was really wrong. So they called police to report this, and when authorities arrived, they found that the campsite and documents belonged to Sandra Hughes. At this point in time, Sandra wasn't a missing person, but they did find it odd that all of her personal belongings were just abandoned like that. So they started to look for her to see if she was okay. Nothing immediate was found, but then 3 days later, Sandra was spotted, and this is when the story starts to get strange. So on July 4th, Sandra ended up crashing her car near the Chiquito Pass trailhead in Madera County. This wasn't far from her abandoned campsite, and it didn't appear that the crash was that bad. Other campers were around when it happened, and according to them, Sandra somehow collided with a tree, and her car ended up high-centered on a stump in a ravine. Based on witnesses and the damage to her car, Sandra wasn't going very fast at the time of the crash. Since other campers were around, they offered to help her, but Sandra refused, saying she was okay. She was then seen walking into the woods alone, and what happened after this has never been explained. It was at this point that Sandra was officially reported missing, and authorities became more concerned after her car crash. A massive search was launched for Sandra, and over the next few days, she was seen 2 more times by separate campers. They each said that she was barefoot and had a bruise on her face. At the time, the campers didn't know that she was a missing person, but they did try to ask if she was okay or if she needed help because she looked a little distressed. According to them, Sandra seemed like she wasn't there, and she ignored anyone that tried to talk to her, continuing to walk walk deeper into the woods alone. This is when authorities thought that Sandra may have suffered a head injury after her crash just due to her bizarre behavior over those few days. Like I said, she wasn't going very fast at the time she crashed, and the damage to her car suggests that it wasn't that bad of a wreck. And those who talked to Sandra right after the fact said that she didn't appear injured, but I guess if you have a head injury, sometimes it's not always that easy to tell. So authorities cracked down on their search and brought in multiple different agencies, tracking dogs, and even searched for Sandra by air. But at first, nothing was found. Then a few days later, search and rescue found Sandra's sleeping bag inside Yosemite National Park, just 2.5 miles from the crash site. The sleeping bag matched her recent REI purchase, so they knew this belonged to Sandra, but she was still nowhere to be found, and authorities started to lose hope that she would be found alive. Then, seemingly out of nowhere a month later, Sandra was seen by 2 hunters. They are pretty adamant that it was her, and they saw her leaning against a tree near where she crashed her car a month earlier. The hunter said that she made eye contact with them, but didn't try waving them down for help, and at this point in time, she didn't look distressed or anything. They did say that she was noticeably thinner than her last known photos on her missing person poster though. After this, Sandra's case kind of went cold again, and to make things more difficult, a massive fire broke out in this exact area in September of 2020, and it lasted months. This burned up any potential evidence and quite literally changed the terrain, but surprisingly, Sandra's car didn't burn at all. Authorities had left it in the same spot where it crashed, hoping Sandra would return to it, because with her outdoor experience and multiple sightings, it really did seem like she was still alive out there somewhere. But after the fire and it being untouched, authorities then removed it since it was clear that Sandra would not be coming back to it. There would be no movement in this case until almost exactly 1 year after Sandra's disappearance, and what I'm about to say is genuinely so creepy. I get goosebumps every time I talk about it. So in July of 2021, a family decided to go camping in the Shut-Eye Peak area. They brought up their 4-wheeler, so it was going to be a really fun time, or so they thought. About halfway through the day, they stopped to eat lunch, and this is when their 3-year-old son started pointing out their car window into an open meadow. He told his parents that there was a woman laying face down with her legs straight up in the air in the middle of the meadow. This 3-year-old said that the woman was dead and she wasn't able to talk or move, but she needed their help. This freaked his parents out really bad, so they went to go look around the meadow fully expecting to see a dead body, but no one was there. When they went back to the car, the 3-year-old proceeded to say that the woman was still there in the exact same spot, and he was pointing directly at her. The woman was wearing a black shirt and jeans, and she had blue hair, and unbeknownst to him, this was exactly Sandra's description to a T at the time she went missing. He just kept repeating that this woman was dead and that she needed their help, so this freaked his parents out enough to make them pack up early and head home since they couldn't see anyone. When they got home, they decided to post their experience on Facebook to see if anyone knew anything about the area, and this is when they found out about Sandra Hughes, who matched the ghost description to a T. They then found out that she disappeared within 5 miles of where they were in the woods. So the parents gave this little boy a bunch of photos, some including Sandra, and he picked Sandra out as the woman he saw in the meadow immediately 3 separate times. The Madera County Sheriff's Office somehow saw this post online and actually contacted the family for more information. Sandra's case was still unsolved, so they thought it couldn't hurt to investigate this tip, even if it was paranormal. So the police, the little boy's dad, and the little boy went back out to where he had seen this dead woman/ghost, and authorities swept the area for literally anything, but they found absolutely nothing. Over the years, there have been multiple searches for Sandra, but it's like she vanished into thin air. Her family says that she was extremely organized and tidy, and she would have never left her campsite abandoned like that. There are a few theories as to what could have happened to her, ranging from accidentally dying of exposure, whether it was from a head injury or not. She could have been met with foul play at some point, or she could still possibly be alive out there somewhere, although the chances of that are slim. And some people believe that her ghost is now haunting the wilderness where she was last seen, and that all of those sightings of her are real. I personally do believe in ghosts, but I'm not entirely sure what to believe in this case. Regardless, it's now been 5 years since Sandra disappeared, and whatever happened to her out there in the Sierra National Forest remains a mystery.
When I think of weird disappearances in national parks, few of them really haunt me the way that 4-year-old Alfred Beilhartz did. Alfred was one of 10 children, and they were all camping in the Rocky Mountain National Park when something very strange happened. They're walking through the park at one point in a line, and Alfred is towards the back of that line. At one point, Alfred either wanders off or something else happens, but the family doesn't notice right away. When they finally notice Alfred is missing, it starts a 10-day manhunt for him. From the beginning, authorities were working from the assumption that Alfred had somehow fallen into the river and drowned, even though his family didn't agree. So they dammed the river so that if his body wasn't there, it couldn't get out. In other words, the body wouldn't be able to float to another region of the park or beyond. They also raked the bottom of the river, but no trace of his body could be found. At this point, the family was like, we believe he was abducted, so they changed tactics. They brought in bloodhounds to search for his scent that way, and boy, did they get a surprise. Instead of leading the searchers towards the river like everybody assumed they would, they instead led them up a 500-foot cliff, which ended at a plateau. Authorities followed the dogs, and when they reached the plateau, the dogs laid down like they had found Alfred and reached the end of the scent trail. Now, obviously, authorities were confused by this because there was no trace of Alfred up there, but to the dogs, it was mission accomplished. They acted like they had found Alfred. The authorities figured they must be broken, something's wrong, let's get another group of dogs. So they did, and those dogs did the same exact thing. While the search is going on, 24 hours after Alfred originally disappeared and 6 miles away, a couple on a hike sat down to take a rest, and the man looked up towards the mountain and saw a child peeking out from about 500 feet up. The man stared at the child for a sec, and the kid seemed to look over the ledge, make a shrill shrieking noise, and then it was like he was jerked backwards. He suddenly moved back towards where the man could no longer see him. The couple didn't know Alfred was missing, so they didn't report it right away. This location up the mountain was known as Devil's Nest, and even trained climbers would struggle to reach it, let alone a 4-year-old child. Authorities were understandably skeptical that a 4-year-old child made it 6 miles away that quickly and made it up there, but they sent people to search at least a day later, and no sign of Alfred could be found. So to recap, the plateau almost 500 feet up where the bloodhounds hid and the Devil's Nest 6 miles away are the only places they really had a clue that Alfred had been there, and yet still they never found him. The family believed all along that he had been abducted, but the question is by who? The family did receive ransom notes several months later, but they don't think it was related. So the question remains, how did a 4-year-old child who was in front of his family disappear without a trace only to be spotted in improbable places, but a body was never found?